I get it, you staring at the dust collector aisle, scrolling through endless models, and you're wondering if you really need a 3 HP unit, or if you'll end up with a machine that sits half-filled most of the time. You've probably already heard the classic warning, buy a collector that's too small and you'll be cleaning the shop more than you're working. But you've also seen the opposite, fear spending a fortune on a beast that's overkill for a hobbyist's occasional sanding. Before you pull the trigger, I want to walk through the real-world experience of a shop that's already using Laguna's Flux 3, so you can decide if it's worth the money for you. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest question for most buyers is whether the 46-gallon bin actually makes a difference in a day-to-day workflow. In a typical wood shop that does a mix of table saw ripping, router work, and a little CNC, the dust load can pile up fast. With a 46-gallon capacity, you're looking at enough room to run a full day of sanding, planing, and routing without having to stop and dump the bin every half hour. That's the kind of downtime you start to notice on the bottom line, especially when you're on a deadline for a client project. For a small hobby space that only sees a couple of hours of sanding a week, that extra volume may feel like empty space, but the size does give you flexibility if your shop ever expands or you take on bigger jobs. The motor is a 3 HP, 220-volt single-phase unit, and that's where the real power claim comes into play. In practice, you'll feel the difference when you fire up a large belt sander or a table saw with a powerful dust port. The suction stays strong even as the bin fills up, which is something many lower-rated collectors can't promise. I've seen a few setups where the suction drops dramatically after the bin reaches half capacity, forcing the user to clear it constantly. With the Flux 3, the drop is modest, still enough to pull fine dust through the 3-panel dust bin and keep the shop air clearer. That translates into a healthier environment, especially if you're already dealing with respirable silica from sanding certain woods. Now, the cleaning method is manual dual paddle. Some newer models use automated cleaning cycles that spin a belt or use a cyclone to dump the debris automatically. Laguna's approach is more old school. You pull a lever and a pair of paddles swing out, shaking the dust out of the bin into a dump bag. It's simple, has no electronics that could fail, and you can hear the dust hitting the bag, which gives you confidence that it's actually being removed. The downside is that you have to be present to pull the lever, and if you're in the middle of a job, you'll need to pause. For a shop that runs continuously, that extra step can be a minor annoyance, but for most woodworkers who work in bursts, it's a trade-off you can live with. One hidden trade-off that shows up after a few weeks is the size of the unit itself. The Flux 3 sits on a sturdy steel frame and takes up a decent footprint, roughly the size of a small chest freezer. If you're working in a cramped corner, you'll need to plan the layout carefully, perhaps moving a workbench or rearranging tool storage. The advantage, though, is that the frame is stable. It doesn't wobble when the motor kicks in, which can be a problem with lighter, cheaper units that shake the whole shop. So you get a solid presence, but you also need to allocate space for it. Who should consider this dust collector? If you're a serious hobbyist who already owns a table saw, a band saw, and does regular sanding, the Flux 3 is a step up from a 1 HP portable collector that can barely keep up with fine dust. It's also a good match for a small commercial shop that needs consistent suction across multiple stations, but doesn't want to invest in a massive industrial system. The price point reflects the larger motor and bin, so you're paying for the ability to run longer cycles without interruption. On the flip side, if your work is limited to occasional hobby projects like a few weekend sanding jobs and you already have a decent shop vac that you can empty every 15 minutes, you might be better off sticking with the smaller, cheaper unit. The extra capacity and power would sit idle most of the time, and you'd be paying for capabilities you never use. A practical strength that often gets overlooked is the 3-panel dust bin design. The panels separate the bulk of the dust from the finer particles that travel through the cyclone and into the motor. In everyday use, that means the filter lasts longer because the larger particles settle in the lower chambers, and you're only pulling fine dust through the filter. I've watched a